Thank you, folks, for being here. I'll start with Mr. Pierce and Mr. Detu from the Chamber. I hear you asking for credible regulatory certainty. When you look at sections 21, 22, 23, which allow the government to override a list of acts, do you have concerns there? And what are your thoughts about that? Mr. Khosla, I note you're concerned about oversight of projects once they're underway. I noticed one of the issues you mentioned was enabling infrastructure, and sometimes I hear that as a euphemism for you wanting the government to spend large sums of money on roads and pipelines and ports. And if that's the case, I understand, would you support deficit spending to obtain that? So normally I hear the private sector calling on the government to throw down the chains of regulation and just letting things happen. And what I'm hearing from you is, no, let's get things organized first. Let's get some standards. Let's get some processes. Get some clarity on what you want. Do you think we're moving too fast here? Are you concerned that down the road we'll end up in court or whatever with some of these issues?
Do you want to go first? You can go.
From my perspective, to the colleagues here, it's a step in the right direction, but cart before the horse. We're talking about a laudable goal of compatible requirements. We have no structures established in the Act to achieve that. So this is where I talk to, it needs to be expert-driven, it needs to be consensus-based, it's public-private. None of that's represented in the bill. And you don't have any section that speaks to standards, which is in many ways the reason why we have many interprovincial trade barriers.
Business is looking for government to be, and the process around an approval to be predictable and credible. And so to have that, and yet it be an unknown path to get to that end because of competing regulations between levels of government, we think is problematic. So to get to your question, we think any initiative like this would have to override certain acts. It would have to take that into consideration in some way. Again, this is a little bit beyond the business view on it, but that process is spoken to very clearly in the Act, that there are still pieces that must be followed, and those overriding principles would occur when there's some form of a process that would be communicated to the public. And again, it's about signaling to the business community what that process is so that the business community can play. If it's going to be dynamic and change every time, that's going to limit investment. So.
And you don't feel it's clear enough at this point, the process?
No, and I don't know that it could be in legislation at this stage. It's certainly not meant to be a criticism. We feel this is an important step to then get to that clarity on how that's actually going to work, and the faster the better.
Khosla?
Yeah, I really liked where you started, which was, the oversight part. We think that a strategy has to be moving now with stealth, with discipline, with focus. We think projects, there are many out there that can go, and they need to move quickly in light of where we are as an economy, in light of where we are in terms of our global presence. Natural gas is sort of key no-brainer. We've got this basin out in Western Canada that's so rich, and no other country in the world would be sitting just watching it, potentially chug along the way we are. So that's generally, we think projects should move faster. That's a simple answer. The second part of your question on enabling infrastructure, there are two parts in our report on that. The first is, you're right, broadly, are there things that will cause roadblocks? So, for example, the Ring of Fire, we've been talking about it for forever, right? If we start to unlock that, if the critical minerals actually come out, then where do they go? And if you'll notice, the Port of Vancouver is kind of congested. So that's one element of that. That should be maybe the #1 project on the list. I'm not sure, but that's something we've put in our report. The second part is not to look at projects statically. So in other words, most of these projects have many different elements. The example I can give you is a transmission line to a mine. Oftentimes, we only review one part of that. And as far as the final point, no, not deficit spending. I talked off the top about all these financing agencies that are there. They're flush with cash. They should be aligned. They should put the capital stacks together and start to move. We even have investment tax credit. So I don't believe there's a lot more spending required unless there's a special project that takes billions. TMX would, I guess, be one of those examples, but the money is there. Let's just get going and then attract the capital back in this country. I mean, the Germans came with $1 billion a couple of years ago and we couldn't do anything with it. That's what we're talking about.
Thank you.